Ever had a complaint show up right after a performance discussion? We're talking about the weaponization of investigations and how to handle complaints that might just be getting even.
Welcome to the HR Investigations Podcast, exploring the issues, challenges, strategies, and solutions. Sponsored by RPCHR and hosted by Natalie Ivy, an HR consultant, licensed PI, and author of the best-selling book, How to Conduct Internal Investigations, a practical guide for human resource professionals. And now, here's Natalie.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to the HR Investigations Podcast. I'm Natalie Ivy, your host, and so happy to have you with me today. In today's episode, we're talking about a sensitive topic in employee relations. It's the weaponization of the investigations process. This occurs when an employee files a complaint, not necessarily to report misconduct, but to counteract the accountability that they just received from their boss. For example, you have a manager who delivers Alicia a performance warning, and the next day, Alicia comes to HR lodging a complaint of harassment about that same manager. Or you have an employee named Joe. Joe just received his annual performance review, and it was less than stellar from his boss. And then the next day, he goes to HR to complain that he feels like he's being discriminated against by said boss. Coincidence? Sometimes yes, but sometimes it's really part of this defensive workplace dynamic. Why? Well, when people feel threatened by, constructive criticism, discipline, or even, potential job loss, they may actually respond by attempting to shift the narrative. Well, what are the triggers? Well, performance improvement plans, PIPs, corrective actions, denied promotional opportunity, maybe schedule changes that are very unpopular, or even the risk of termination. Therefore, when they file a complaint and run to HR or to the employee relations team, it can feel to them like they're regaining control of the situation. Well, what's HR's role? The key principle that I follow is, look, number one, if a complaint really appears retaliatory, you might suspect it, you kind of feel it, you kind of think about it in the back of your mind. But what you can't do is let it cloud your judgment during the intake conversation. It still has to be evaluated objectively. And that means as HR or employee relations, or even if you're an ethics professional here, you can't dismiss a complaint simply because it came on the heels of the employee receiving some sort of disciplinary action or maybe a poor performance review. Instead, your investigation really needs to focus on gathering of evidence, taking a look at timelines, seeing what you can corroborate, and also what kind of documentation, what exists, especially around the performance stuff. Patterns do emerge, though, when you review prior complaints and you look at the employee's performance records, and also even when you compare that to witness statements that you gather. And one of the most powerful tools that HR has is a timeline analysis. What you want to do is take a look at when issues were first documented, and when did this employee really receive maybe the first disciplinary warning? What's the timeline? Is this an employee that has now already received, let's say, 3 separate disciplinary warnings, and now they're on kind of the last and final, and they're 1 foot out the door? Okay, that's kind of interesting. And so looking back on the timing of when they have received disciplinary action, and suddenly now they're raising an issue that they've been harassed by their boss for the last 5 years. Okay, those kinds of things are kind of questionable. Okay, and then also looking at specifically the timing of the complaint. Sometimes the timeline really does tell the story. Look, the weaponization of investigations is real, but the answer is not skepticism. The answer is really structured, unbiased investigation practices, and also very much having in place a policy that strictly prohibits employees from making bad faith complaints. In other words, you've got to have a policy that is in place that says if you're going to make stuff up, just fraudulently misrepresent your complaint just to get even with somebody, just to get somebody in trouble, okay, there needs to be some very serious consequences. And a lot of times it's going to result in that person being separated from employment. However, and this is a big however, you really are going to need to have some very compelling evidence for legal to support the separation of a complainant. And the reason is that legal always gets a little squeamish about the potential for a claim of retaliation. And the reason is that you have a complainant who came forward to a member of management, if you're HR, lodged a complaint alleging there was something going on illegally, and therefore that is considered a protected activity where they are protected from retaliation. However, when somebody is just fraudulently misrepresenting the complaint itself, you need to have that baked into either your code of conduct or have a separate policy regarding making bad faith complaints. And therefore, if you've conducted an investigation and you determined that the complainant really did come forward in bad faith, they really were just making it up because they're angry about being held accountable, then don't let it worry you. The hard evidence is going to be your defense, and the facts are going to speak for themselves. Now, in closing out today's episode, I also want to mention that cases in which an employee comes forward shortly after receiving, let's say, some disciplinary action or maybe a poor review. Look, I have personally worked cases in which the performance feedback that was given, so let's say manager's name is Alfred, and Alfred has delivered some subjective, very unfair feedback to a direct report. And let's say it's to an employee, let's call him Jose, right? And Jose is just really fired up. He comes into HR and he's complaining about Alfred. And what can happen sometimes is HR looks at the timeline. It's like, oh yeah, he's just really ticked off about just being written up by Al. And so there's nothing to this. And you're just not really listening. You're kind of going through the motions of the intake. And the problem is that Jose is really a legitimate complainant. I've personally had situations where I've investigated where the complainant has been far more talented than the leader. So let's use Alfred and Jose here as an example. Let's say Alfred is someone who feels threatened by Jose. Jose is very competent from a technical standpoint, perhaps even as a leader. Maybe Jose comes to the table with some experience having worked at a previous organization. I see that as well. A lot of times when you have an existing leader who's been around a while, and then you have a person who has joined the team who comes with some really, really great experience. They've got a portfolio of skills that ruffles the feathers of that existing leader. Sometimes when a leader feels threatened by a direct report who is more talented, they can purposely try to set someone up, and that means setting up to fail. And that's an attempt to eliminate the threat to their career. In other words, also exposing their incompetence. So keep in mind, your job is to remain neutral, to gather facts and not allow bias to seep into the intake discussion simply because an employee is lodging a complaint shortly after getting some kind of performance feedback or corrective action. Okay, so there you have it for today. I hope you picked up some valuable tips from today's episode. And I also want to mention that my next 2-day How to Conduct Internal Investigations certification workshop, it is scheduled for June 23rd and 24th from 11 to 5 Eastern Time. And the registration link is in the show notes. And if you register during the early bird period, you're going to snag an author-signed copy of my book, How to Conduct Internal Investigations. You'll get the supplemental toolkit with interview templates and a bunch of other stuff. You're going to get $100 off registration and earn the Certified HR Investigator badge that you can use on your socials. And you're also going to snag a nice canvas tote bag with some cool RPC HR swag in it. And also for groups of 3 or more who attend my workshops together, I do offer a 10% group discount. So I look forward to seeing you there. All right, gang, until next time, always remember, the best investigation is the one you don't have to do. See ya.
Thanks for joining us today on the HR Investigations Podcast. Be sure to subscribe, like, and share the show with any colleagues who will benefit from our strategies and solutions. For free bonus resources, simply visit hr-investigations.com. And remember, if you'd like some help with improving your investigative skills, or if your organization is in need of an external investigator to help with a case, please get in touch with us. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.